In the spring of 255 BC, on the open plains along the Bagradas River near Tunis in North Africa, an invading Roman consular army was completely annihilated in a single afternoon. The forces of the Roman Republic, commanded by Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus, were not broken by a native Carthaginian commander, but by a foreign mercenary officer named Xanthippus of Sparta. Only months earlier, Rome appeared to have secured total victory in the First Punic War. After establishing naval dominance in 256 BC, Roman legions landed on the African coast, defeated Carthaginian forces at Adys, and captured key territory within 10 miles of Carthage itself. Desperate to avert collapse, the Carthaginian government offered to negotiate peace, only for Consul Regulus to demand terms so extreme that Carthage chose to fight to the end instead. In their crisis, the Carthaginian council entrusted operational command to Xanthippus, a Spartan drillmaster who recognized that Punic defeats were caused not by Roman invincibility, but by the improper use of terrain and army structure. By shifting the theater of battle from rocky hills down to flat ground, Xanthippus synchronized 100 war elephants and 4,000 horsemen to execute a devastating combined arms double envelopment. The heavy physical impact of 100 war elephants driving directly into dense legionary shields shattered the cohesion of the Roman center. Out of 15,500 Roman troops, approximately 13,000 were killed on the field, and 500 were captured along with their consul, leaving barely 2,000 survivors to escape. Welcome back to World Chronicles. Today, we break down the military reforms of Xanthippus, the fatal formation adjustments made by Consul Regulus, the tactical mechanics of the Bagradas River envelopment, and the historical reality behind one of Rome's most heavily mythologized early defeats. To understand how Rome came to campaign on African soil, one must look to the origins of the First Punic War in 264 BC. The conflict erupted over the strategic Sicilian city of Messana, modern Messina, positioned on the narrow strait separating Sicily from peninsular Italy. At the time, Rome was an expanding land power that had recently unified the Italian peninsula south of the Arno River under its authority. Carthage, in contrast, was an established maritime empire dominating trade, coastal strongholds, and sea lanes across the western Mediterranean, including North Africa, southern Spain, and western Sicily. Neither republic initially planned a war of continental expansion, yet the strategic value of Sicily made direct collision almost inevitable once Roman legions crossed the strait. For the first 8 years of hostilities, operations in Sicily produced an exhausting stalemate. While Roman legions consistently demonstrated superiority in open field engagements and captured inland cities like Agrigentum in 262 BC, Carthage pursued a defensive strategy designed to wear its opponent down. The Carthaginians anchored their defense in heavily fortified coastal cities such as Lilybaeum and Panormus. Because Rome possessed no significant navy, Carthaginian fleets easily supplied and reinforced these strongholds by sea, preventing Roman land victories from becoming strategically decisive. Realizing that Sicily could never be fully conquered without contesting the maritime domain, the Roman Senate took the radical step of building a competitive fleet from the ground up. Using a captured Punic quinquereme as a blueprint, Rome constructed over 100 warships in a matter of months. To offset their lack of seamanship, Roman engineers equipped their vessels with the corvus, a spiked boarding bridge that latched onto enemy decks and converted naval maneuvering into familiar hand-to-hand infantry combat. This innovation yielded immediate dividends, securing unexpected Roman naval victories at Mylae in 260 BC and Sulci in 258 BC. By 256 BC, frustrated by the ongoing grind in Sicily, the Roman Senate formulated an ambitious strategic plan: invade the Carthaginian heartland in North Africa to force a rapid conclusion to the war. To clear the passage, Rome deployed a massive fleet of 330 warships carrying 26,000 picked legionaries. Off the southern coast of Sicily, they encountered 350 Carthaginian vessels at the Battle of Cape Ecnomus. In one of the largest naval engagements in human history, involving nearly 680 warships and roughly 290,000 crew and marines, the groaning timber of Roman boarding bridges slamming into Punic hulls marked a total breakdown of Carthaginian naval defense. The Roman victory at Cape Ecnomus shattered Carthage's maritime barrier. The Punic navy lost over 90 ships sunk or captured, while Roman losses remained comparatively light. With its main fleet broken and retreating to protect the capital, Carthage could no longer prevent a foreign army from landing on the North African coast. The Roman Senate had successfully shifted the primary theater of war from the contested harbors of Sicily directly to the agricultural heartland of its rival. With the sea lanes cleared after Cape Ecnomus, the path to North Africa lay open. In the summer of 256 BC, the Roman expeditionary fleet made landfall near Aspis, modern Kilibia, on the eastern side of the Cape Bon Peninsula. Commanded jointly by Consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso Longus, the Romans landed roughly 26,000 legionaries and dragged their warships onto the beach, establishing a fortified camp protected by a trench and palisade. Aspis was besieged and quickly captured, providing Rome with a secure coastal bridgehead from which to project land power into Carthaginian territory. Roman detachments immediately fanned out across the agrarian countryside, systematically plundering rich Punic estates and gathering supplies to support their army. The sight of burning agricultural villas across the fertile Cape Bon Peninsula marked a destructive new phase of the war, as the Romans seized over 20,000 captives and vast herds of livestock. As autumn turned to winter, however, the Roman High Command faced severe logistical realities. Sustaining an expeditionary force of more than 100,000 men, including rowers and naval crews, deep within enemy territory over the winter months posed an unsustainable supply burden. In response to couriers sent from North Africa, the Roman Senate issued orders splitting the invasion army. Consul Lucius Manlius Vulso Longus was recalled to Italy with the bulk of the fleet, taking the majority of the transports, naval crews, and accumulated booty back to Rome to celebrate a formal triumph. Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus was ordered to remain in Africa to hold the bridgehead and weaken Carthaginian resolve pending reinforcements in the spring. To execute this task, Regulus was left with 40 ships, roughly 15,000 infantry, and a mere 500 horsemen. While 15,000 heavy legionaries provided a formidable tactical corps for field engagements, a total of 500 cavalry represented a dangerously meager mounted force for an army operating in North Africa. In the flat, open terrain characteristic of the region, cavalry was essential for scouting, foraging, and screening infantry flanks. Despite orders allowing consuls wide discretion to incite revolts among Carthage's subject territories, Regulus made little immediate progress in building a substantial Numidian cavalry alliance. Regulus's operational choices were further dictated by the political pressures inherent to Roman magisterial command. Having served as consul 11 years earlier in 267 BC, Regulus was an experienced and ambitious commander. According to the historian Polybius, Regulus was acutely aware that his consular term would expire in the spring of 255 BC. fearing that a successor sent by the Senate would arrive to replace him and claim the political glory of ending the war. Regulus refused to adopt a passive, defensive posture at Aspis over the winter. Instead, he chose to take his streamlined consular army and march directly inland, seeking a decisive land battle that would force Carthage into total capitulation before his command expired. Marching inland toward Carthage, Regulus advanced his consular army in late 256 BC, roughly 60 kilometers southeast of the capital, to lay siege to the strategic town of Adys. To meet this direct threat to their agricultural interior, the Carthaginian authorities recalled Hamilcar from Sicily with 5,000 infantry and 500 cavalry, combining his forces with an army under native generals Hasdrubal and Bastar. Though roughly equal in overall strength to the Roman legionary force and possessing a formidable contingent of war elephants, the Carthaginian commanders committed a catastrophic operational error. Fearing a direct clash in the open against Roman heavy infantry, they established their fortified camp on a steep, rocky hill overlooking the town. The sharp, uneven stone underfoot at Adys rendered the massive African war elephants virtually useless, halting their momentum before a charge could even begin. By encamping on rugged, elevated terrain, the Punic generals effectively neutralized their own two greatest tactical assets, cavalry mobility and elephant shock power. Recognizing the Carthaginian deployment error, Regulus executed a daring night march, splitting his army into two columns to launch a surprise dawn attack on the hill from two directions. Despite initial resistance from Carthaginian mercenaries, who repulsed one Roman column down the slope, the second Roman column struck the camp from the opposite flank, causing immediate panic. The Punic infantry broke and fled. While their cavalry and elephants managed to escape into the surrounding plains with minimal losses due to the broken terrain, the defeat at Adys dismantled Carthaginian land defenses across the region. Following his victory, Regulus pressed his advantage and captured the city of Tunis, establishing a forward operational base only 16 kilometers from the walls of Carthage. From Tunis, Roman detachments systematically raided the immediate environs of the capital, while neighboring Numidian tribes exploited Punic weakness to launch widespread revolts across the countryside. The situation inside Carthage quickly deteriorated into an existential emergency. The suffocating crush of thousands of rural refugees flooding through the narrow stone gates of Carthage overburdened the city's granaries, triggering severe food shortages. Desperate to relieve the pressure, the Carthaginian government sent envoys to Regulus to negotiate a peace treaty. Believing Carthage was on the brink of complete collapse, Regulus adopted an unyielding posture. While primary accounts vary, with Polybius omitting the specific list of demands and later historians like Cassius Dio recording detailed terms, Regulus essentially demanded an unconditional surrender, known in Roman law as deditio. According to these accounts, Rome required Carthage to evacuate Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, pay all of Rome's accrued war expenses along with an annual tribute, dismantle its navy down to a single warship, and supply 50 warships to Rome upon request. Though modern scholars consider the extreme extent of these reported terms disputed, it remains clear that Regulus offered conditions so severe that they amounted to total political subjugation. The Carthaginian Council of 30, known as the Gerousia, evaluated the Roman demands and unanimously rejected them. Concluding that submission would strip Carthage of its sovereignty, the Punic Council resolved that if their state was to fall, it would do so fighting in the field. Regulus's overweening confidence had backfired, transforming a desperate enemy into a unified population committed to total resistance. While Carthage resolved to fight on, a fresh contingent of mercenaries arrived in the capital during the winter of 256 to 255 BC, recruited by Punic officers dispatched across the Mediterranean. Among these men was Xanthippus, a Spartan officer who possessed an extensive background in Greek military science. Upon analyzing recent Carthaginian reversals, Xanthippus remarked to fellow officers that Punic defeats were caused not by Roman bravery, but by the operational incompetence of native generals who failed to deploy their cavalry and war elephants properly. His critiques quickly circulated among the military ranks and reached the Carthaginian Senate. Summoned before the Council of 30 to present his assessment, Xanthippus argued that by shifting future combat from rugged terrain down to open, level plains, Carthage could easily protect its territory and defeat the invading legions. Ancient historiography remains divided regarding the exact mechanics of Xanthippus's rise to supreme operational command. Polybius records that the Carthaginian generals accepted his analysis and immediately transferred operational control of their forces to him. In contrast, the historian Appian asserts that Carthage dispatched a formal diplomatic embassy to Sparta, requesting a qualified field commander, and that the Spartan authorities sent Xanthippus directly. Diodorus Siculus presents Xanthippus as an ordinary mercenary soldier who boldly pressed the generals and volunteered to lead, while Cassius Dio suggests his authority became so absolute that he assumed civil and military control over Carthage itself. Regardless of the exact political path of his appointment, the Punic Senate granted him freedom to restructure the state's remaining military assets. Xanthippus's background presents a notable historical paradox. While ancient sources highlight his traditional agoge, or Spartan martial upbringing, classical Sparta maintained an infantry-focused hoplite system with zero historical experience in operating or countering war elephants. Modern military historians thus infer that Xanthippus must have previously served as an officer in Hellenistic successor armies, such as the Epirote forces under Pyrrhus, or Seleucid and Ptolemaic armies, where the operational integration of elephantry, massed cavalry, and pike phalanxes was highly developed. This Hellenistic expertise enabled him to evaluate Carthage's multi-ethnic military components not as isolated units, but as elements of a synchronized, combined arms system. Xanthippus immediately initiated a rigorous, professional overhaul of the Carthaginian army throughout the winter months. He organized the untrained citizen militia and surviving mercenaries into a cohesive, deep Greek-style phalanx, instilling strict formation discipline. Simultaneously, he drilled the elite Punic heavy horse and Numidian light skirmishing cavalry in coordinated flanking maneuvers. Outside the city walls, the rhythmic, unified thud of thousands of citizen spearmen stamping their boots during daily phalanx drills signaled a dramatic restoration of army morale. To demonstrate solidarity with his men during field exercises, Diodorus records that when a soldier complained that a mounted officer could order others into danger without personal risk, Xanthippus immediately dismounted, handed his reins to a servant, and marched on foot alongside the heavy infantry. By early spring of 255 BC, Xanthippus had forged a field army numbering approximately 12,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and nearly 100 African war elephants. The center of his formation was anchored by the newly disciplined Carthaginian citizen phalanx, flanked by experienced Greek and African mercenaries, while his superior cavalry force was divided equally between the wings. Positioned in a single continuous line in front of the center infantry stood the Elephant Corps. Departing the capital, Xanthippus marched his army deliberately through the flat countryside toward the Roman encampment, determined to force battle exclusively on open ground where his horsemen and war elephants could operate without spatial restriction. Encamping roughly 2 kilometers apart on the open plain adjacent to the Bagradas River, the modern Mejerda River near Tunis, the two armies arrayed for battle the following morning. Xanthippus structured his deployment to maximize both his massive 8-to-1 cavalry superiority and the unchallenged shock capability of his war elephants. Across his front, he placed 100 war elephants in a single continuous line. Behind the beasts stood the main infantry force, anchored in the center by the newly drilled Carthaginian citizen phalanx and flanked on either side by experienced Sicilian veterans and Greek mercenaries. He divided his 4,000 horsemen, comprising elite Punic heavy cavalry and mobile Numidian skirmishers, equally across both wings, supported by light foot soldiers. In total, Xanthippus fielded approximately 12,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 100 war elephants. Against this force stood Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus, with roughly 15,000 legionaries and a mere 500 horsemen. Recognizing the immediate threat posed by the forward elephant line, Regulus made a deliberate tactical modification to the standard Roman triplex aces formation. He positioned his light skirmishers, the velites, in front and packed his heavy legionary maniples unusually deep and dense in the center. Regulus calculated that a deepened infantry block would possess the physical mass required to absorb the kinetic shock of the elephant charge and punch through the beasts. Once past the animals, the massed legions were expected to smash directly into the Carthaginian phalanx and break the enemy army before flanking maneuvers could develop. However, as the historian Polybius observed, while deepening the maniples created an anti-elephant screen, it severely shortened the frontage of the Roman line. By narrowing his front to gain depth, Regulus surrendered his ability to protect his flanks, leaving his 500 horsemen dangerously exposed on the wings. The engagement opened with Xanthippus ordering a simultaneous charge of his war elephants and cavalry wings. On the flanks, the outcome was swift. Outnumbered 8-to-1, the 500 Roman horsemen were quickly overwhelmed, routed, and driven from the field by the Punic and Numidian cavalry. In the center, the Roman legions advanced, shouting their battle cry and banging sword hilts against their wooden shields in an effort to terrify the charging beasts. The deafening roar of thousands of legionaries banging swords against shields was soon muffled by the crushing advance of the pachyderm line. Unmoved by the noise, the 100 war elephants slammed directly into the forward Roman ranks, trampling legionaries underfoot and throwing the front maniples into chaos. As the frontal collision unfolded, the battle fractured into two distinct tactical sectors. On the Roman left wing, a force of approximately 2,000 infantry, likely Latin allies, overlapped the outer end of the elephant line. Bypassing the beasts, these cohorts delivered a ferocious charge against the Carthaginian right wing, breaking the mercenary infantry facing them and pursuing the fugitives back to their camp. In the center, however, the main Roman body absorbed the full weight of the elephant charge. Though the deep formation prevented an immediate collapse, the forward ranks suffered severe trampling casualties. A fraction of the legionaries managed to fight their way through the gaps between the elephants. Yet when these exhausted cohorts emerged on the other side, they collided directly with the fresh, ordered rows of the Carthaginian citizen phalanx, which held firm and halted their advance. At this critical operational juncture, Xanthippus's plan achieved complete synchronization. Having chased the Roman horsemen off the field, the 4,000 Punic and Numidian cavalry wheeled inward across the open plain, striking the Roman center squarely in both flanks and the rear. The double envelopment was complete. The Roman legionaries were forced to turn in all directions, forming a hollow defensive block under attack from every side. Pinned on flat terrain, the dense Roman square became a static target. Mobile Numidian skirmishers rode along the perimeter, hurling a continuous hail of javelins into the packed ranks, while the war elephants continued to rampage through the outer edges and the citizen phalanx pressed relentlessly from the front. Deprived of maneuverability, the compressed Roman center collapsed inward under the combined weight of armor, horse, and beast. The physical crowding was so severe that legionaries were jammed together, unable to draw their short swords or wield their shields effectively. Xanthippus then ordered the citizen phalanx to deliver the final infantry assault, closing the distance and cutting down the trapped formation. Consul Regulus and a small guard of roughly 500 men managed to break out of the immediate encirclement, but they were pursued across the flat plain by Punic cavalry and forced to surrender shortly after. Trapped on all sides under a hail of Numidian javelins and crushed by the phalanx, the Roman expeditionary force dissolved into chaos, leaving only a fraction of the army alive. The toll of the defeat was catastrophic for the Roman Republic. Of the approximately 15,500 men fielded by Consul Regulus, over 13,000 legionaries and allied troops were killed on the battlefield. Another 500 soldiers, including Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus himself, were taken prisoner by the Carthaginians. Only about 2,000 men, the Latin allied cohorts that had successfully routed the Carthaginian right wing earlier in the battle, managed to break away from the engagement and retreat to the coastal stronghold of Aspis. In contrast, Carthaginian casualties were remarkably light, totaling approximately 800 mercenaries who had borne the main impact of the Roman left-wing assault. A stark silence soon settled across the Bagradas plain as Punic detachments systematically stripped the armor from thousands of fallen legionaries. In a single afternoon, the entire Roman campaign in North Africa was completely dismantled. The strategy formulated by the Roman Senate in 256 BC to bypass the static island campaign in Sicily and strike directly at the heart of the Carthaginian homeland had ended in total operational failure. The immediate threat to the city of Carthage vanished overnight. For Carthage, the Battle of the Bagradas River marked its only major victory on land during the entire 23-year duration of the First Punic War. It shattered the aura of invincibility that Roman heavy infantry had established over preceding campaigns and demonstrated the devastating potential of synchronized combined arms warfare. The political and economic consequences within North Africa were immediate and profound. The victory instantly relieved the siege conditions that had paralyzed Carthage, allowing agricultural transport to resume and lifting the severe famine that had gripped the overcrowded capital. With the main Roman army destroyed, the Carthaginian high command turned its attention to restoring internal order, using its resurgent army to systematically suppress the revolts among its Numidian subjects and re-establish control over its hinterland. Meanwhile, the 2,000 Roman survivors who had reached Aspis fortified their position on the Cape Bon Peninsula, isolated and besieged by Carthaginian forces. When news of the disaster reached Rome, the Senate recognized that the African campaign was lost, but refused to abandon the remnant of its army holding out on the coast. Orders were immediately issued to mobilize naval reserves, equipping a massive fleet to break the Punic blockade and evacuate the garrison at Aspis before it was starved into surrender. In the summer of 255 BC, the Roman Senate dispatched a relief fleet of approximately 350 warships to North Africa under the joint command of consuls Servius Fulvius Paetinus Nobilior and Marcus Aemilius Paulus. As the expedition crossed the Mediterranean toward the Cape Bon Peninsula, a Carthaginian fleet of roughly 200 vessels attempted to intercept them off Cape Hermaeum, modern Cape Bon. The resulting naval clash ended in another decisive Roman tactical victory. The Romans sank 16 enemy warships and captured 114 Punic vessels along with their crews, swelling the total size of the combined fleet to over 450 ships. Sailing along the coast to Aspis, the consuls easily relieved the siege, embarked the 2,000 legionary survivors, and abandoned the African bridgehead. With the strategic objectives of the evacuation completed, the consuls set sail for Italy in mid-July of 255 BC. According to Polybius, the experienced naval pilots and ship captains vehemently warned the Roman commanders against navigating the southern, exposed coast of Sicily. The pilots pointed out that between the rising of the constellations of Orion and Sirius, the waters off southern Sicily were notoriously prone to sudden, violent summer gales. Furthermore, the coastline between Phintius and Cape Camarina offered virtually no natural harbors or safe anchorages for a fleet of several hundred galleys. Ignoring the maritime expertise of their Greek and allied Italian captains, Consuls Nobilior and Paulus insisted on hugging the dangerous southern shore. Their decision was driven partly by military stubbornness and partly by the desire to project presence, anchoring briefly at allied coastal towns to intimidate Punic garrisons and secure additional plunder. As the massive armada rounded the rocky promontory off Camarina, an extraordinary tempest erupted from the south. Driven directly toward the lee shore, the heavy warships were caught in a position where no amount of seamanship could save them. The deafening, catastrophic wood-on-stone impact, as hundreds of wooden hulls shattered against the jagged cliffs of Cape Passaro, signaled the immediate collapse of the fleet. The loss of life and material off Camarina stands as the single worst maritime catastrophe recorded in ancient history. Out of 464 warships, a figure including the newly captured Punic prizes and roughly 300 transport vessels, an astonishing 384 ships were destroyed and swept onto the rocks. More than 100,000 men perished, the vast majority being non-Roman Latin allies who served as oarsmen and marines. Modern naval historians point out that the immense weight of the Corvus boarding bridge, mounted high on the prow of Roman quinquiremes, severely compromised the vessel's center of gravity and seaworthiness during severe swell, directly accelerating the sinkings. Tellingly, Roman historical records make no further mention of the Corvus being deployed in subsequent naval operations. The double disaster of the spring and summer of 255 BC completely altered the balance of the First Punic War. In less than 4 months, Rome had lost its entire expeditionary army in North Africa and nearly its whole military fleet off the Sicilian coast, suffering demographic losses that would have crippled any other ancient state. Sensing an immediate opportunity, Carthage resumed aggressive military preparations, shipping 140 war elephants and fresh infantry forces back to Sicily under the command of Hasdrubal to reclaim lost territory. In the wake of these twin catastrophes, Roman memory transformed a humiliating military defeat into an enduring national epic. Primary among these cultural constructs was the myth of the Bagradas River serpent. According to later Roman writers, including Livy and Silius Italicus, Regulus's army encamped near the river was attacked by a monstrous 120-foot dragon that killed dozens of legionaries before being slain with military catapults. by recasting their African campaign as a heroic confrontation with a mythic beast. Roman tradition subtly cushioned the reality of a tactical disaster inflicted by human generalship. Even more influential was the romanticized martyrdom of Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus. In later Roman literary tradition, championed by Cicero and Horace, Regulus was sent to Rome on parole around 250 BC to negotiate a peace treaty or prisoner exchange. True to his Roman honor, Regulus supposedly urged the Senate to reject the terms, arguing that exchanging healthy Punic captives for an aging, defeated general was strategically foolish. Bound by his sacred oath, he then voluntarily returned to Carthage, where enraged Punic authorities allegedly cut off his eyelids, exposed him to the blinding sun, and tortured him to death in a spiked barrel. Critical historiography presents a far different reality. Polybius, the earliest and most reliable source who wrote closest to the events, mentions neither the peace mission nor the dramatic torture, implying that Regulus died in captivity of natural causes or neglect. Furthermore, fragments from Diodorus Siculus suggest that the story of Regulus's horrific torture was fabricated by his widow and sons in Rome. Having been granted custody of high-born Carthaginian prisoners, including generals Boestar and Hamilcar, Regulus's family subjected them to such extreme, retaliatory cruelty that Roman tribunes had to intervene. Creating the legend of Regulus's heroic martyrdom served to justify the family's actions while reinforcing Roman propaganda regarding Punic treachery known as Punica Fides. A similar web of myth surrounded the ultimate fate of Xanthippus. Later writers, such as Diodorus and Appian, claimed that envious Carthaginian authorities betrayed the Spartan hero, providing him with a leaky ship that sank in the sea, or ordering ship captains to throw him overboard on his journey home. Modern historians, following Polybius, reject these tales as standard anti-Punic slurs. Recognizing the inevitable political jealousy of the Punic oligarchy, Xanthippus took his pay and departed Carthage immediately after his victory. Historical records indicate that a general named Xanthippus was appointed governor of a newly acquired province by King Ptolemy III Euergetes of Egypt in 245 BC, confirming that the Spartan officer survived his African service to continue a distinguished career in the Hellenistic world. The tactical lessons of the Bagradas River resonated far beyond the First Punic War. 5 years after the disaster, at the Battle of Ecnomus in 250 BC, Consul Lucius Caecilius Metellus neutralized Rome's psychological fear of war elephants by luring the beasts toward defensive trenches, where light skirmishers pelted them with javelins until they panicked and trampled their own lines. More significantly, Xanthippus's masterclass in combined arms double envelopment on the Bagradas plain served as a direct theoretical model for Hannibal Barca 39 years later. At Cannae in 216 BC, Hannibal refined the Spartans' geometry to inflict the greatest single-day defeat in Roman history. Though the First Punic War dragged on for another 14 years until Rome's final naval victory at the Aegates Islands in 241 BC, the battle on the Bagradas River remained a stark historical lesson. It proved that discipline alone could not save an army when command, terrain, and combined arms tactics converged against it. Subscribe to our channel to join us as we continue to explore the great chapters and decisive turning points of world history.